ahead and call the meeting to order. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, nation. All right, roll call, please.
Ms. Bloom? Here. Mrs. Spirito? Here. Ms. Laird? Here. Mr. Price?
Here.
Ms. Ray?
Here.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from our regular meeting held May 9th, 2022, please?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Laird. Can I have a second? Second by Mrs. Ray. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Laird?
Yes.
Mrs. Ray? Mrs. Bloom? Mrs. Spirito?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes, motion's approved. No walk-on items
No,
tonight?
sir, not this evening.
Legislative report.
I'm going to yield that till the next meeting since we have a special presentation tonight on
Okay.
some legislative issues.
Thank you. Moving on to the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Price. In our last meeting, we had some questions about kind of some of the policies revolving around our transgender students. So we thought before we step in anything that we shouldn't, we thought we'd get a guest here that's an expert. So I'd like to introduce Melissa Bondi. Melissa represents Bricker and Eckler. This is the law firm that the board has used for, I think, 30 years, ever since I've been around. So called on in, asked her if she could come and sort of give us all the ins and outs of what we're facing here and kind of the latest legal trends. And Melissa, just if you would, everything, you can speak into the microphone. Obviously, that gives us into our live stream. So
Fair enough.
thank you very much.
I can do that.
All right.
All right. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the terms that I use when I talk about this subject. Bricker and Eckler is lucky to represent about 300 school districts around the state. So I get to talk to boards and educators about this topic fairly frequently. And I have learned not to just jump in without a little bit of background on some of the terminology. So some of the things that I may talk about are sex assigned at birth. That sounds like just exactly what it is. You know, child comes out, sex is assigned at birth on a birth certificate, right? There's gender identity, which is the way someone may express themselves. That has three components. It has a social component, so names and pronouns. It has a legal component. They may change their names. They may change their markers on birth certificates or driver's licenses. So legally, they may change what they're identifying as. And then the final is the medical. So there are three realms there. For the most part, in K-12, we don't deal with the medical. We deal very frequently with first the social. Name changes, how they identify, how they dress. And then we may, as the students get older, be dealing with some of the legal issues as they change their name legally. When do we do that on our records? When do we do it on diplomas? Those kinds of things. Gender expression is just what it sounds like, how they're going to present. It's the way they wear their hair, the way they dress, what they express, right? Cisgender, I may use that term. That is when your gender expression matches and gender identity matches your sex assigned at birth. Cisgender. For example, I wear my hair long, I wear makeup, I'm gender expressing as a female. I am a female at birth, and so I would refer to myself as cisgender. If someone is identifying or expressing themselves opposite of their sex assigned at birth, we call that transgender. It is perfectly acceptable to say a cis person or a trans person. That's not considered insulting. So when I talk about some of the trends in the case law, what we're seeing, you may hear me say cis or trans. That's what I mean. Gender nonconforming is a concept that I will also talk about. That is when a person is expressing themselves in a way that does not conform with stereotypical gender norms. So we may have a norm that women present feminine with makeup or longer hair. If a woman presents, no makeup, very short hair, suits, we might say that's gender non-conforming. And so what we find is that the case law takes the word sex in two different statutes, which I'm going to kind of give you the overview of so that you kind of understand the legal framework of what issues schools face. When you have that framework relatively firmly in your brain, it's easier to get through some of the brain teasers that we face as school districts in accommodating cisgender and transgender students. But what we find is that gender nonconforming is really where the case law started. We have two statutory frameworks, Title IX, which is in the educational context, and Title VII, which is in the employment context. But before we get to the statute, we have the constitutional. And so we'll find that in making these accommodations, we're going to talk about equal protection under the law. And very frequently when we look at a legal issue and the courts look at a legal issue, they're looking at, do we extend equal protection to a cisgender student and a transgender student, or do we treat them differently? Let me give you an example. The most common one I get is the question of, Johnny has presented himself and said that he wants to be known as Jane. What do we do with that? Well, I usually ask the question, what do we do when AJ, Alexander Joseph, says, I don't want to be known by Alexander Joseph, I want to be called AJ? Do we make them fill out forms before we call them AJ? Do we call home and say, can we call them AJ? Do we require them to get a legal name change before we call the student AJ? The answer is no, right? We typically will accommodate that. So that cisgender student that says, I want to be AJ instead of Alexander Joseph, we accommodate. If we require a transgender student to fill out forms or seek parental permission or seek a legal name change before we go from John to Jane, we have not treated them equally under our policies and procedures. So you can see that constitutional framework, how it starts to play out in some of our accommodation issues before we ever even get to the statutory framework, which is both the Title IX in employment in education and Title VII in employment. And in addition to that, what we have administrative agencies that will pass regulations. And so you've heard lots and lots and lots about the new Title IX regs. Those are also, they do have the force of law. They are adopted by agencies. They go through rulemaking, and they tell us how an agency is going to enforce statute on us. Why is that important? Because for Title IX, if we do not comply with Title IX, we put our federal funds at risk. So even though it may not be written in statute, if the agency says to us, this is how we intend to enforce this, and we're telling you how we intend to enforce this through our regs, the regs that we pass and our regulatory guidance, we need to be aware of that because the failure to do that can put the school district's funds at risk. So there are multiple levels that we look at with the constitutional, the statutory, and the regulatory when we're looking at these issues. The case law began in the employment context. As far back as 1996, we had our first gender nonconforming case. It was a woman. It's the PricewaterhouseCoopers case, who did not present in a feminine manner in the workplace and argued that her gender nonconformance cost her promotions. She argued she was not feminine enough, that her supervisors expected pantyhose and skirts and long hair in sales. The Supreme Court said that is a form of sex discrimination, to treat someone differently because they do not conform to a gender stereotype. That was our very first introduction to the word sex, which is just 3 little letters That is a form of sex discrimination, that gender nonconformance. And it was in the employment context. We've had that expand over the years from gender nonconformance to sexual orientation. So we now know that the Supreme Court has said in the Bostock case in 2020 that sexual orientation and gender identity also fall under those three little letters of sex. So to discriminate against someone in employment because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity is a form of sex discrimination as well. That's under Title VII. We then had, in 2020, you will remember we were under a different presidential administration. We had an administration at that time that said, that's where that stops. We're only going to extend coverage under the word sex to sexual orientation and gender identity under Title VII. It doesn't go any farther. On January 1st of 2021, the Biden administration passed an executive order saying, we believe that Bostock in Title VII should have equal force in Title IX. So now schools and educational entities, you too will be pulled under this notion that sex discrimination is not just gender nonconforming, but it will protect gender identity and sexual orientation. And so one of the first things I say when I get questions about where does this come from and how settled is this area, as you can see, it can change with an administrative change. I don't know what the next administration, what they will say, right? What I can tell you is that we have case law that is percolating through the courts. Even though we have these regulatory agencies and administrations telling us how they'll enforce, we also have the courts looking at these arguments. And in general, what we will find, or what we have found, is that the courts read the word sex pretty broadly. In most cases where Title IX has been challenged on either gender identity or sexual orientation, most circuits have found that there is protection under Title IX. There is a split of authority right now. Couple of things you need to know when I say split of authority. So my courts, we have district courts, those are in the states, right? They move up into the circuit courts, which cover multiple states. And then we have the Supreme Court. Bostock in Title VII is a Supreme Court case. It's there until the Supreme Court says otherwise. The Title IX case law, we sit in the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit has said that Title IX does cover sex orientation and gender identity. The 11th Circuit, which is out of Florida, not where you sit, has held otherwise. They faced an issue on bathroom accommodation, so which bathroom may a transgender student use. And the policies had generally been falling that if you prohibited a student or individual from using the restroom or the facility with which they identified, that was a form of sex discrimination. And that was uniform until the 11th Circuit last year said, we don't think so. They ruled the way all the rest of the circuit courts had ruled, and then they took the decision en banc, which means normally a 3-panel judge hears it. All of the judges heard it, and they reversed themselves, and they said, we don't believe that Title IX would cover that. Actually, it's on appeal, but that's why they pulled it back, was because there was a debate on that issue. If the 11th Circuit holds on that decision, we will have a circuit split on this issue, which means it would be ripe to go up to the Supreme Court. So again, an area that's not settled on this issue. But generally what you find is the administration that is in, that is putting people in in the administrative agencies will tell the agencies, here are my enforcement priorities. So right now, again, we're in an administration where the administration is telling the Department of Education, we will enforce Title IX on school districts to the protection of transgender students. And also in sexual orientation. And so we know that if we end up before the Office of Civil Rights, that's where they're going to enforce. That's how they will enforce. And so we try to keep our finger on the pulse of that when we're, telling districts, how does this happen? Where are we on this issue? I know that facility usage is one of those areas where communities very frequently focus a lot on. As I mentioned, we have a Sixth Circuit case that tells us it's a Highland case. So it came out of the Southern District of Ohio. It was a district that prohibited transgender students from using the restroom in which they identify. That was challenged by the individual, then joined by the Office for Civil Rights. And ultimately, the Sixth Circuit took it after it came out of Ohio and said it was a form of discrimination on equal protection. So they didn't use Title IX, but that's the current state of law in Ohio, in the Sixth Circuit, that it would be a violation of equal protection to deny a student the ability to use the restroom with which they identify. That is currently the status of the law here. And again, unless the 11th Circuit ends up taking their case up to the Supremes, that's where we're stuck at the moment. So the Equal Protection Clause, as I mentioned, to me is one of the stronger arguments. I don't know that you're ever going to get anyone to agree that we on the way we interpret law. If everyone could come to agreement on how we interpret law, we wouldn't need lawyers, right? And so I think there's always arguments on both sides, but I do think that the equal protection argument is got a lot less wiggle room. And so when I'm advising districts, I often will fall back in that framework of what do I ask of my cisgender students? What do I ask of my transgender students? Do I protect them the same? Am I asking for the same things? Am I enforcing my policies the same way? For example, we don't generally tell a cisgender student, I'm going to make an announcement to your community that you're using this restroom. Were we to make an announcement to our community that we had a transgender student that was going to use a particular restroom, we would be treating that transgender student differently than we do our cisgender students. And so again, I find that the equal protection argument makes these things a little bit easier when you start to back them up from a lot of the emotion. In can I pass that equal protection argument? So I know that was one of the issues that had raised some concern when I was preparing for this presentation. One of the things I went back and looked at was whether Fremont had local ordinances, because we talked about the Constitution, we talked about statutes, we talked about regulatory guidance. Fremont does not name sexual orientation or gender orientation in any of their EEO ordinances. But interestingly, the board does have a policy. It's GBA, which does list gender identity and sexual orientation as protected classes. So the board has actually already adopted a policy that has defined those as part of discrimination on the basis of sex. So just keeping that little tidbit in mind. Hopefully I hit the biggies for you guys. I'll look through my notes real quick. Questions that I had received. I think we talked about the fact that, on any given day, how positive am I that how a court's going to rule in the end? I'm not. And that is one of the reasons that when we advise boards, Very frequently, a board will come to us and say, I want a policy. I want to make this black and white for my community. I want to know exactly how we're going to deal with this issue when it comes to name changes, when it comes to records, when it comes to facility usage, when it comes to locker rooms. I often will say, I don't think that that's a wise plan for a couple of reasons. Number one, you will have students and employees that are in different stages of transition. Some may be at a social stage of transition. Some may be ready for a medical transition, right? But they may need different things at different times. And so we want to accommodate them so that they can partake in our programs and activities in the most safe and harassment-free way as they can. And so I don't like to come up with a bright line, hard and fast rules. I do think it's a case-by-case basis. What do you as an individual need to be able to access our services? What do you need to be able to participate in your education? What do you need to be able to participate in your in your job? And I frequently will get the question, but what about everyone else? How does that affect everyone else, particularly in facility usage? For those who are not comfortable, let's say, with that accommodation. And I will frequently advise that I think from a practical matter, one of the best things we can do is create privacy spaces for all individuals. If there are cisgender individuals who are not comfortable with transgender individuals in their locker room, the more spaces we have in locker rooms for privacy for all of our students, so our transgender and our cisgender, the better off we are. I don't know if you guys can remember going back to middle school. I didn't like changing in front of people, and I would have been really happy with a private stall. And I do think that for those individuals, we do have to keep into account, how do we keep everyone comfortable and able to learn and able to access our programming? And there may be people who have very legitimate reasons for not feeling comfortable. We have constitutional challenges, for example, on the First Amendment. Individuals who believe that, particularly in the employment context, teachers who have argued to recognize a student's transgender name, gender identity, is a violation of their First Amendment exercise of religion. And we have courts that are entertaining both sides of that argument, and I don't know where that's going to end up. So I think, again, I come back to, how do we create spaces where we're accommodating all beliefs, right? And maybe some of that means that we are creating additional privacy spaces, particularly in our facilities, for those who are not ready or not comfortable with that. So as a practical matter, that's not a legal suggestion, but that's a practical matter that I've had many districts work into. I've had multiple districts that have moved to all gender neutral restrooms, single stall restrooms. And then they have created additional privacy spaces in locker rooms for precisely that reason. I think with that, I'm happy to go into some of the records issues, but I know facilities were the big issue that you guys were concerned about. So, John, do you have anything you think I didn't?
I do not. And I was looking through my list. I think you covered everything that we had asked you. I didn't know if the board had anything.
I have a quick question. I just want to make sure I think I understand the order of all of this. So the policies that we get, the recommendations come from the Ohio School Board Association based on laws as they exist at that time. So am I correct, John, in that recommendation or that particular policy was based on the Biden administration's directives and the agencies who put together the regulations that we have to comply with? They interpreted that recommendation based on that.
I'm fairly safe to say that.
And is it a fair assumption to say that in potentially not complying with that, based on how the law is interpreted, at least through our district as of right now, then that would potentially equate to us being at risk on federal funds?
So what you would be at risk of at that point would be not following your own board policy, which is always you promulgated it, you're going to follow it, right? Is generally the way that goes. On policy, that language, I'm sure, was a result of the Biden administration's executive order. However, one thing that I didn't mention that your question raises is that I believe last month, the Biden administration, hang on, it's an update to my recent materials. So the last set of materials wouldn't have it. The Food and Drug Administration, if you can believe it, which
I can believe anything with the government. Right?
yeah, they run your free and reduced lunch programs, which of course have an anti-discrimination provision to them. They have recently pronounced that the educational policies that govern those must now expressly include a prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So they are the first of the administrative agencies in this administration that have come out and expressly said your board policy must include this language. And I don't think it's very long until the rest of the federal agencies that require anti-discrimination policies will be making a very similar pronouncement.
So potentially the result of not complying with that is we would lose participation in those programs.
Correct. So the district's receipt of federal funds makes their compliance with the federal regulations and enforcement framework imperative, because when you don't, that's when you run the risk of drawing a complaint and putting the funding at risk. Having said that, I've been a school law lawyer for 23 years now. I have only seen an enforcement action on funds once. Typically what happens is that the fallout politically is so, the heat that a public entity takes for fighting that becomes one of those things that eventually you settle. So I don't think the government truly does come after funds, every day, but the political fallout is never very fun. And that's typically where those settle, rather than in an enforcement action for funds. But that's the ultimate risk, is that you put your funds at risk.
That sounds like blackmail.
Nope. You can always say no to the federal funds.
I know, but
Private
you need
schools
the
do it.
funds, you kind of don't have a choice. Or like,
Oh, I absolutely agree. I get, but I will tell you that's why private schools will very frequently only operate off of tuition, because they get to say no to the regulatory frameworks.
This is related on the fringe, not directly, but on the fringe. I know since we have parents here and people watching, and it's kind of a hot topic in our community, like it is the rest of the nation. The Florida legislation in regards to teaching of these topics,
Curriculum.
Hey, I gotta say, I understand a piece of that now. I don't want to exclude absolutely anyone. We love all children, and we want them to feel safe and included and loved here. But we had to have a well-educated, well-experienced lawyer interpret the terms of LGBTQ identity for us. And I can't imagine young children deciphering that. So you kind of brought to light for me a topic, and maybe for others at home, why that might be an area of conflict for some. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, any good lawyer will tell you, don't jump off a bridge before you have to. And so we are watching the legislature here in Ohio very closely, because we know that there is debate on language that is very similar to the Florida bills happening in our state house. And so I'm reluctant to make to do much more than say we're watching it, and that we see what's happening. I truly do believe that curriculum is very different from this legal framework. And 2 cents from me, not as a lawyer, is I want to leave the curriculum to my educators, not to my legislators. So, I hope that's where we land, because I think in the end, local government and those people who are in the schools closest to the students will be able to make those decisions without an edict from a legislative body. But I don't know where we'll land there. We're watching, and we promise we'll have a bulletin as soon as there's something. The board, we do pepper clients and anyone who wants to. We have we are all very active on Twitter, and so all of the many of the lawyers will tweet out as we're watching things. That's the first place you're going to see it, and we are very good about putting bulletins out. And so you can subscribe to our little bulletins. You might ultimately be like, okay, Brooker's putting out too many of these. I don't want them, but they are there. So, well, I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
I really appreciate it.
for all the information.
My pleasure.
We didn't have anything else under the.
Actually, I did just quickly, if I may.
Sure.
This portion of our programming, since it's kind of the work session part, Denise has brought the kind of the first official draft of our strategic plan. So our intention really is to give you this tonight, let you look at it for a couple weeks, and then we'll talk about it more next time when you've seen it. So I know you've seen portions of this, parts of this. We've tweaked it a couple times out of our committee meetings. Some of you were in those meetings as well, but this is kind of the first final draft. Is that a good way to say it, Denise? So I'm passing this out. Anything else to add, Denise, about that?
No, I was just going to comment. Good evening, board members. We've had our health and wellness subcommittee as well as our finance subcommittee meet to review and give some feedback. And so what Mr. Detweiler is passing out for you is, like he said, it's that first final draft that we would like your eyes on. And then hopefully any comments that you might have in the next couple of weeks, please share those back with Mr. Detweiler. And if you remember our timeline from the very beginning, which feels like months and months and months ago, our hope was to have it approved at the June 13th board agenda meeting. So, and then we will have our work cut out for us for the next 3 years.
If you have any questions on that process, obviously just take a look at that and we'll chew on that next time. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And that does conclude then my portion of the board's work session. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll move on to the community part. First hearing of the public. If anyone would like to address the board, please come up to the podium, state your name and address just for the record. We would like you to limit it to 5 minutes so we can include anyone else that would like to speak. So if anyone would like to address the board, you're more than welcome to at this point. Nobody at this time? Okay. Moving on to recommendations of the superintendent then.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price. First thing are a couple resignations, Candace Queenan and Jennifer Shimanowski-Melly. Item 2, we'd like your approval on a termination of a probationary period this evening, item 2. Item 3, administrative appointments of 2 psychologists. Anymore in our world, psychologists are like unicorns, aren't they, Mrs. Abernathy? We found 2 unicorns. Lucky us. So we are going to get them while we can. So with your approval, we'll get them on board this evening. We have a couple appointments here. Jordan Kramer will be at Krogan as an intervention specialist, another unicorn. And then Jackie Minoski will continue then. She was a long-term sub at Ross and now will be our full-time teacher at Ross. And then Courtney Warner, also language arts at Ross High School. Item B then, we have bus driver Michael Coble has passed his license and is ready to roll. And Darren Lee is also joining us as a bus driver. It's good to see those. Some of our last crop of people have gotten through the training process. Student teacher mentors, there's a small stipend from the universities. With your approval, we can grant those to these teachers. You'll notice some are full and some are half, so that's why there's a different amount there. Student teacher mentors then are listed at the bottom. Those are from Heidelberg. So each university has a little different rate. Item 5 is Bowling Green. Item 6 is Heidelberg. That brings us to our first roll call.
Can I get a motion to approve items 1 through 6, please?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Spiritu. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Laird. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Spiritu?
Yes.
Ms. Laird?
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Mrs. Ray, Mr. Price.
Yes. Motion's approved.
Thank you very much. We pulled, actually, Tom, for your benefits, you could vote on item 6. We pulled your name off of item 7 as an abstention for Tia Price for the same stipend.
Because you know I would say no to.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to cause any trouble. That's about that.
I don't know if you want her as a
I'm
mentor.
going to stay out of that. Tag out. I'm out.
She's not here. She's actually coaching
You're
tonight.
talking
so I don't
tough.
have
This
to-
is
she won't
on
hear it
record,
either.
Mr. Price.
I'm
You know
safe.
that.
I'm safe. All right. Can I get a motion to approve item 7, please? Motion by Mrs. Ray. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bloom. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Ray.
Yeah.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Ms. Laird.
Yes.
Motion's approved.
Thank you very much. Moving on, item 8. These are all status changes due to increased education. With your approval, I think it's just a good sign that our teachers are always learning. We're lifelong learners. Item 9, and this is beginning a whole section of summer school stuff. Like, remember, 2 months ago, you approved the program. 1 month ago, you approved the leaders. And now we're going to staff those. So as far as the summer school, we've got one here for the Atkinson Elementary School. That's the first section there. Top of the next page is Dawn Souders, the secretary for said program. Then Krogan Elementary is the next paragraph, and those teachers are listed there, starting with Lamar Baker. Regina Reed has agreed to be our secretary at our Krogan program. And for bus drivers there, we have, starting with Ashley and ending with Lori Smith, drivers for the elementary summer intervention program. 3/4 down the page there, we have teachers for the middle school program. Got a few people there that are ready to help us. And then the FMS summer intervention program, these are our bus drivers that will help us with our middle school program. Turning to the top of page 6, bus driver for the classroom to career program, which is a high school program, but separate than the other. Michael Baker will help us with that. Also, then we have a set of teachers helping us with our credit recovery this summer at Ross High School. And then the next program is the summer intervention for our state testing, and those teachers are listed. You see a couple names there are the same. They will kind of pass back and forth between those programs as needed. This is a students come and go flow kind of thing. So wherever they're needed, that's where they'll be. Item 10 then is a substitute supervisor for the summer program, and then a substitutes, Maria Asasi, and then another list for support staff. Let's make sure we have cooks, custodians, everybody helping us for substitute services. Food service program for our summer programs, Kathy Adams, Dana Affiliator. At the top of the next page in high school, Candy Kane, who's our current high school manager as well. That brings us to item 12, substitute food service programs. Those substitutes then Rebecca Banda and Tammy Hottinger. There's our summer program.
Can I get a motion to approve items 8 through 12, please?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bloom. I have a second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Laird. Any discussion?
Just quickly, if you've kind of flip back through those, you see it's a lot of ESSER. I mean, this really is, I just want to make that very public. These are ESSER funds intended for this very purpose to help kids get caught up. So just wanted to point that out, Mr. Price. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does this bring us to a full staff for the program, or do we still have some?
We're waiting on numbers, to be quite honest. We don't really know what full staff means yet because we don't know what our student participation is going to be.
Sure.
So we will react accordingly. So I think we kind of started with a bare bones start. If we have an overwhelming response, we'll hit the bricks again for some more staffing. But we're trying to shoot in that balance, trying to find out kind of how many we'll need for the program, really based on student response.
Can you walk the parents through the eligibility and the requirements for kids participating? And I'm just looking for, is it voluntary? Or if academically they're behind by certain markers, is it required?
Yeah, no, there's no required summer program. It is all voluntary. Denise, if you want to help us kind of maybe how we identified those students.
Absolutely. Thank you. For our elementary programs and our middle school program, we've asked our teachers to provide us some input. So we created a sort of a multi-criterion referral form. So the teachers have the opportunity to look at the elementary level, we're looking at their reading, language, arts grades off of their report card, their math grades. We're looking at attendance. We're looking at their iReady scores. So that gives us a really good, well-rounded picture of our child. And then there's even an opportunity, just kind of that open box for the classroom teacher to share some information that has been with that child all year long to make sure that we have that Those multi-criterion sheets are collected, given to the coordinators that have been approved for the programs, and then they initiate those communications to our families. Thus far, it's kind of mixed. We have some of our families that have said, "Thank you for notifying me, but we're not looking for a summer intervention." And then we have other families that have already signed up and are very, very excited. We also, our building principals are talking about the program in their buildings. So we have sometimes parents calling, making that self-referral. The teacher may feel like the child's doing an adequate job and maybe didn't refer them, but the parent has come forward and said, "Please consider my child in this mix as well." So then we try to collect all of that same information so that we can look at apples to apples with all of our children and put that together. So that's kind of the process where we are currently, which, as Mr. Detweiler said, we're trying to make sure that once we have a stronger number, we get a little bit closer. I know we're getting there,
Really close.
and it's fast, but just that communication back and forth, and then we'll make sure that we have students ready, and we'll get the information to our busing and get them into our sites, and then teach them up solidly for a good 3 weeks.
And then
Thank you.
you said that was K through 8.
That's K through 8. High school, thank you, Mr. Price. High school is a little bit different story. That credit recovery component is, again, we struggle. We can't mandate for a student to participate, but we are strongly encouraging that credit recovery program is designed specifically for any of our high school age students who are credit deficient, which means that either this year or previous years, they have actually failed the course and therefore were not awarded the credits that they need to earn towards graduation. So they have the opportunity. It's an online component in the summer. It's Edgenuity, which we are using all of this school year. But we also then place teachers in that lab at Ross High School, and we have staff available to sit next to, work with, redo, and motivate and engage our students from 8 to noon every day at Ross. So that's a huge component. Children have the opportunity to make up those credits and then get back on track for graduation, which is what we want of them. So we are highly encouraging our participation.
All right. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Mrs. Rai,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes. Motion's approved.
Thank you very much. Last two items for me are item 13 and 14. 13 is the 6th and 7th grade social studies online licenses. You see, that's not a lot of money in the curriculum world. It's significant dollars, but not some things we spend for curriculum. That's just an online opportunity for our students to engage with our social studies curriculum. Item 14, I'd like to explain a little more, though. That is, as you remember, we were finally 1-to-1 at Ross High School, 9 through 12. So our plan is to now, as our seniors turn their devices back in, we will bring those into this building and get very close to a 1-to-1 for next fall in this building. Then these that you're approving tonight will then be the new freshman devices that our incoming freshmen this fall will get. So no device at the high school will ever be more than 3 years old, which is kind of our goal, to keep that to be sort of maybe the best, fastest, latest in the district, and then cycle the rest of those down through the grade levels until we are completely 1-to-1 for a district. So I just want to make sure everybody understood that. And luckily, ESSER came at a time when we can make use of those funds for this purchase. So that's item 13 and 14.
All right. Can I get a motion to approve items 13 and 14, please? Motion by Mrs. Ray. I have a second.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Espiritu. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Rai, Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved. Moving on to the report of the treasurer.
Good evening. I have a couple things on the board agenda tonight for approval. Item 15 is some supplemental appropriations that we need last minute just to get the scholarships paid out for the year in United Way, and something that we have to purchase with our classroom facilities that weren't foreseen, of course, at the beginning of the year. Item 16 is an update to our permanent appropriations that we had at the beginning of the back in September that had gotten approved. And for those two, I need a motion for approval.
Can I get a motion to approve items 15 and 16, please?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bloom. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Laird. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Mrs. Ray.
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved.
Okay. Item 17 is the monthly financials for March and April for this fiscal year. Not going to go too deep into that just because the next item 18 is 5-year forecast, and that'll pretty much hit on them. Oh, they have them.
Okay.
Yep, you should each have a copy on binder clip together at your space. So if you want to look at the very last page, that's the actual 5-year forecast. And then I'm just going to kind of go over some of the different highlights of this. It is a little better than November, so it's always a good thing to see a little bit of a better state each time. Our main revenues are the real estate, ODE funding, and public utilities. Those are our biggest areas of funding, as you can see on the sheet. So in our revenues, we have the interest revenue on investments is projected down over the next couple of years. Part of that is that we don't have the larger dollar amounts from the construction, and also just interest rates aren't doing as well right now. If you look at one of our areas is down in revenue. Trying to look at this real quick. Would be the Medicaid and casino. That also includes our BWC payments that we get. If you remember last fiscal year, we got a very large refund from the state. So that's part of where that going from 1.1 million down to 390,000. Also, I'm sure, as you can imagine, our casino revenue is down from the last couple of years as well. And actually our Medicaid reimbursements, we, for this fiscal year, have been behind due to some reporting issues, but we're working on getting those taken care of with our outside providers so that we're better on track. But we have projected out pretty much a flat for the next couple of years in that casino Medicaid line. You'll see open enrollment is at nothing because of the change to the state funding. We no longer will receive money in for an open enrollment, but when we get to expenses, you'll see where those purchase services are down quite a bit to make up for that loss in the open enrollment revenue. You'll see our ODE funding is down, or the state of Ohio public school funding is down. Again, that's a change to the state formula on how they fund our schools. But once we get down to expenses, you also see where there's a large decrease in the purchase service, which is also a byproduct of the change to school funding. So that is the highlights on the revenues. A little bit more. Overall, our property tax collection has been down a little bit this year from last year, and we are looking into that just because we do know that property values went up with this last real estate valuation. So we were not foreseeing that it was going to go down this fiscal year. So we are checking into why that happened. Potentially, it could be that people paid at the first half collections last year with like stimulus money. They paid their full amount rather than paying it first half and second half. So maybe that could be it. But we are going to dig in deeper on that and see exactly why that's down when the values did go up this year. One really good thing is our public utility payments are quite a bit higher. that has a couple different factors coming into it. One of it being our AMP payments are no longer coming out. So that is great and wonderful. It's nice to see that revenue coming back in. And also we had a late payment from AEP that came in late for the summer collection. So we got it in this first collection of 2022. So that kind of inflated the public utility payments. Another thing with public utilities, we also have the Nexus pipeline. They've been paying at a reduced rate currently because they're appealing their values. I think currently they're paying at 40%. From what we've heard at the state level, they're hoping be wrapped up by fall of this year. And they're hopefully going to come in higher than what they're currently paying, but they don't foresee it being anything less than what they're currently paying. So we won't have to be paying back people. So those are a couple of the big things with public utilities that are going on right now.
How long has that been in the court? I mean, I know it got backed up because of COVID, but it's been at least, what, 2 or 3 years now?
I believe so.
I would say, if you remember, the AMP thing was a 5-year. It took 5 years for them to rule on that. The whole time we were being overpaid, which is why we had to pay
all that
$6 million back over
With
18
interest.
months with interest. That's right. Yeah, we didn't have the courtesy of taking 5 years to pay it back. So we're hoping that if this does swing our way and it's much better, we will, be on the other end of that maybe with
Right.
the next time.
Yeah, it'd be nice to not get bent over again.
Yes, sir.
Just to give a quick explanation, since we have some guests here tonight on that particular item, am I correct in saying that the amount of which utility companies were to pay was set at a certain calculation? Things changed, and so the schools were receiving dollars based on that calculation. Some things changed in the evaluation of utility companies was put together. And because of that, those companies went back and asked, well, not only could they have a reduction, but could they get back some of what they had paid the school? So it was never a case that school districts miscalculated. It's that they based on what the original calculation was. And then the state had to rule in which way it was going to go with some changes. So,
And yeah, that's right. And basically the difference is company A paid 100% and then won the challenge and got all that money back. Company B is paying 40% of what they could pay, and we stand to get some of that back. Right.
But the worst part about all of that is, as a school district and other public entities that receive those tax dollars, don't have a seat at the table in
That's
any
right.
of those discussions.
Not at all.
So we get to pay AMP back, or we did pay him back $6 million, but we had no say in the matter whatsoever.
That's right.
Everything is done without us, which is, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. But we're talking about state government, so why should
There you go.
So, like I said up in the top, you'll see some changes in our revenue that were directly impacted by our state funding. Just a couple others that shows, yes, our open enrollment revenue is going to be 0 and our funding itself has lowered, but our expenses have lowered by quite a bit. There's a purchase service line that's currently down about 4.9 million, and a lot of that is actually due to this changing in state funding. If you take what we were given by the new revenue or the new state funding versus how much our expenses have lowered, that would normally we would be expensing out to the state funding, we're actually increased in what we netted for receiving state funding from the state a little bit. So salary and benefits are, of course, our largest expenditure. Right now, we are trending kind of where we thought we would be. It's gonna look like there was a really large increase between last fiscal year and this fiscal year. But that actually, last fiscal year, we wrote off about $1.5 million to our different federal funds so that that we could write off to the federal funds So we only actually had, instead of the 10.9% increase that you see off to the side in salaries, I think we only actually had a 1 or 2% increase for salaries from last year to this year. And then we just kind of kept a very low increase over the next couple of years.
That salary increase from last year that you said, and wasn't it COVID relief stuff?
Yeah.
Mostly.
And student and wellness success dollars, we were able to write off some salaries there as well.
And that money we gave to the staff does not go into the formula for their salaries in the future.
No.
Just a one-time, like a bonus almost, not built into the base for the future. So it helped us give them a little bit, but not commit to a future expense. Yeah.
Yep. And let's see. We also had equipment was lower this year versus last year, probably due to the newer buildings that we had to put up make some additional purchases with the startups in the new buildings. But the next couple of years, we're going to keep them pretty flat. We're thinking that supply levels are probably going to return to traditional levels, but we also do understand that there's going to be some costs have gone up on certain supplies as well. So we've built some increases in to accommodate for that as well. Obviously, fuel expenses are out of this world. I know for everybody involved, not just a school district, but everybody. So we've kind of built that in there as well. The rise in the prices. And then at the very bottom, you'll see there we did throw in some ESSER money to offset some of the expenses for the next 3 years that we get to have to spend those funds down, in addition to other uses that we're having with that funding. But we are going to write off about $1.5 million in those different expense areas to those ESSER dollars so that we can keep our expenses a little bit on the lower side.
John, when it came to the fuel costs, what was the numbers in your update?
$1.89 back in November was $1.89 and $4.18, I think. 220% increase just in the last 6 months. Hard to budget that.
Yeah.
And food now, I think we're just now on the front end of what that's going to be. I don't do a lot of shopping in my house. I love Mrs. Detweiler does most of the shopping. I know you find that hard to believe, but she just, every day she comes home in a rant. I mean, just the prices are just unbelievable. So I think we're going to start feeling that as that trickles into the school system. It's just going to be another thing we really have to watch.
Yep. So just kind of a recap of what's going on at the bottom. Last year we had we were deficit spending last year. This year we're projecting to not have deficit spending, and that for the next couple of years. And then you'll see in fiscal year fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26 we will hit back to deficit spending. So obviously we're gonna have to look at, between you guys or the board and our directors, making some decisions on how to keep those expenses down, which is going to be really fun with the rise in costs.
All right.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
Megan, we had talked a while back about putting together a breakdown of monies left over from the build.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Because some of that potentially can come back into operating and offset. We were under budget. We did really well. Thank goodness we partnered with great people to build our beautiful buildings and did well in the budget. So with some of this where we may fall short, perhaps money could shift into there.
Yeah.
And there's still OHS or OFCC is, it still needs to be the project has to be financially closed before those funds officially get released.
So we're a ways out for that. Yeah.
Right.
About a year, I think.
Probably at least.
Well,
Well, best case probably.
best case, yes.
I tried to
But it
ask.
would be nice to have those projections.
Mhm.
'Cause this is projecting a
Right.
few years out. So if we knew what we had a year out to offset that,
Right. To help
be
out.
helpful.
Right. Any other questions for Megan? Can I get a motion to approve items 17 and 18 then?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Laird. Could I have a second? Second by Mrs. Ray. Any other discussion on those? Roll call, please.
Ms. Laird,
Yes.
Mrs. Ray, Mrs. Bloom,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes, motion's approved. Member communications and information, Mrs. Bloom.
Well, I'd like to thank Denise for all the information and explaining the school, the summer stuff. And for the lawyer coming in, she tried to, I'm sure, explain it to the parents as best I can. I mean, I don't know how much it made better for them, but at least she was able to come in and give some explanation. That's about it.
Mrs. Spiritu.
I also like to thank the attorney for coming in and hopefully answering our questions and the questions for the community that they had. I'm glad to see that the summer program is coming together, and for the teachers and the staff that is willing to help put that together. So hopefully the parents and the students take advantage of the summer program.
Ms. Laird.
Congratulations to everybody that worked so hard in getting our students to a 1-to-1 ratio on digital devices. That certainly equips them for everything from testing to being ready, when they step out into the workforce and what's expected today. I think that's really great. I want to thank the attorney also for coming to give us the terms and definitions that we all hear at times, and some detail on what that has to do with what public entities are facing in terms of policy. Just want to say it's easy to love and respect one another. To interpret law and regulation and how that's all tied in together is a whole other ballgame. And particularly in public schools and other public entities, where complying with those is tied into the funding that you have to educate kids and provide programs. So while I understand what she was saying, that we could choose to refuse the federal funding because private schools choose to do that, so they don't have to. This is, in fact, a public school. It is not a private school. By definition, it is meant to be doors open for every child in this public to come, and it's funded through public dollars. So while that may be technically true, I don't know how practical it is true for a public school to forego public funding and still operate. It's unfortunate. That's it.
Mrs. Ray.
I mirror what my colleagues said. Appreciate the attorney coming in to explain the things that we all have questions about. Also, for our summer school, I'd like to encourage the parents to, by all means, let's encourage your children to come. Make it so they can come. With COVID and all the learning that was missed, and with all the other things that have been going on, it'll give the students a chance to try to play catch up or either be on time. And also, summer's long for kids. So, between start and finish, there's a lot of, brain power that's kind of resting. So it'll give the students a chance to keep their minds fresh, to catch up on things that possibly they may didn't understand in class, or maybe needed a little more help on. So parents, let your kids come to the summer school and the socialization, plus they get lunch. So you don't have to feed that. So that's pretty much what I was going to say. And also, I see something that's dear to my heart. The ACE mentoring program was funded again with United Way. And that also are two ways that we can say thank you to the community, because the community gives the United Way. And also, the mentors are from the community to come and help and encourage our students. So it's kind of a win-win situation. Okay. Either way, we thank our community for first providing the funds for United Way, and we thank our community for taking advantage of that and coming working with our students. So appreciate that. And we're almost here at the end of the school year. And for all that we've been through, I don't think Mr. Detweiler got too much career, but that we've been through a lot, and we've come out on ahead, I feel. No, we're all better for the wear. And thank you for all that you've done. Thank you to our treasurer for keeping us on board, afloat. Thanks to Mrs. Hurt for keeping our children up to snuff, and our students. So thanks for this. I feel like it was a pretty positive, good year.
Like everyone else, thank you for Melissa for coming in, explaining some of the laws that we're not experts on. We don't make the laws. We don't interpret the laws. We just have to abide by the laws. Whether we like them or not, that's the way it is. But I guess that's even more important why we should engage at a legislative level, whether it's who we vote for, whether we voice our opinions, whatever that is. There are times where a school district, their hands are tied. What are you going to do? It's just, that's what it is, whether you like it or not. So for a community and everyone to be involved, that's the most important thing. Also with the summer program, it's great to have all those staff on board. Mm-hmm. Parents take advantage of it, yes. Especially those high school students that are credit deficient right now. If it means 3 weeks of work in the summer and you get to graduate next year on time, do it. Don't, I mean, there's free food, there's free transportation, there's an online component. You get teachers, all morning long to help you one-on-one. What a perfect time to get that in and make sure you're on track to get that diploma. It's so important anymore. So
air-conditioned building too, by the way.
Air-conditioned building now too. Yes,
not like the old days.
It's not 99 degrees at the old Ross High School during the summer. This is true. So take advantage of it, please. That's why we're putting it on. I mean, we're grateful for those funds to be able to do that. But the more we can do, the better off. So I'm sure if we need more staff, we'll get more staff in there. It's, let's get all the kids in there that we can. That would be great. So.
Yeah. During my years, it's one of the saddest parts of graduation is when the students didn't take advantage of the credit recovery. They got the tents and all the dates for the graduation parties, only to find out that their students weren't ready. And some parents get a little angry because they feel like there's some magic button. They don't realize that there are state regulations on graduation that they may not have met. So I feel like the credit recovery is so important to keep happy parents, happy students, and happy school.
All right, with that, there's no reason for executive session. If I could have a motion to adjourn, please. Motion by Ms. Laird. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Espiritu. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Laird?
Yes.
Mrs. Spiritu?
Yes.
Mrs. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ray? Mr. Price?
Yes. Motion's approved. Meeting's adjourned.